Hi, welcome to Bad Movie Reviews. First, the direction. Neither film is an easy standout in this regard, though Patty Jenkins certainly did a solid job with Wonder Woman. She's a little too in love with slow motion, perhaps in an attempt to ape the style of Zack Snyder, and some of the action consequently comes off a tad cheesy, but her work with the cast in dialogue-centric scenes is far more effective. Much like Jenkins, Captain Marvel's Linda Bowden and Ryan Fleck come from an indie film background, and they similarly seem far more at home with the intimate character-driven scenes than the set pieces. Ultimately, Captain Marvel's direction is much spottier than Wonder Woman. The pacing, especially early on, is all over the place, the action is occasionally incoherent, and it feels a bit like Bowden and Fleck were out of their depth. You don't really get the same sense from Jenkins, who makes confident choices throughout, and her film feels all the more gathered and holistic as a result, flaws and all.
Second, the hero. Now, this is a toughie. Both films are groundbreaking works for their respective franchises in revolving around iconic female superheroes, so there was plenty at stake for each movie to get their protagonists right. Diana Prince undeniably benefited from being introduced in Batman vs Superman, though Wonder Woman is her true coming-out party, with a strong character-driven focus. Gadot isn't the best actress in the world, but she's well cast in the part and knocks the physical stuff out of the park. Brie Larson landing the role of Carol Danvers is meanwhile a totally inspired spot of casting on paper, given her immense, Oscar-winning talent and evident suitability for the part. Larson certainly brings the necessary charm to the table, though she also feels more blatantly underserved by the sometimes wonky material. Wonder Woman gives audiences an incredibly strong sense of who its titular hero is, whereas Captain Marvel feels decidedly messier and unsure of itself. They're both fish-out-of-water tales, but Wonder Woman did a much better job of creating a badass origin story for a hero who also happens to be likable without it coming off particularly forced. With a better script and stronger filmmakers though, Larson probably could have steamrolled this category.
Third, the villains. Wonder Woman's period setting naturally forces it to defer to the most classic of historical baddies, the Germans. Sadly, General Ludendorff is a pretty one-note villain, and his sidekick Dr. Poison doesn't get nearly enough to do. The scene where they're both giggling like Scooby-Doo villains after poisoning a room full of German officers is just embarrassing. And then there's the third act reveal of the real big bad, Ares. Unfortunately, Thulis isn't a naturally intimidating actor, and placing him behind a CGI suit of armor is just unintentionally hilarious. Not to forget all those Nigel Thornberry jokes. Captain Marvel meanwhile does surprisingly interesting and nuanced things with Skrull leader Talos, in many ways subverting what audiences expect of Mendelsohn as an actor, and proving far more of a character than the heavy makeup might suggest. Sadly, Captain Marvel's other antagonists aren't up to a whole lot, despite the solid efforts of the cast. Neither movie is particularly outstanding in this regard, though Captain Marvel does deliver one genuinely good villain, so it takes the easy win here.
Fourth, the narrative. Both Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel are pretty awkward when it comes to how their plots unfold, but which one serves the characters the best? Wonder Woman is framed by a naff contemporary wraparound where Diana is reminiscing about the good old days, though thankfully this doesn't infest the bulk of the story too much. It's a pretty straightforward origin story that draws some very obvious cues from Captain America the First Avenger, but it's well told with a distinct, easily digestible through line. Captain Marvel is more of a mishmash and clearly intended to reflect Carol Danvers' fractured mind as a result. There's a lot of cutting back and forth there which often proves more frustrating than entertaining, and 20-plus movies into the MCU, its rather unambitious plot, centered around technological hoo-ha, doesn't really cut it. Story-wise, neither film is especially unique, but Wonder Woman is so much more cohesive, and does a far better job of making familiar material feel fresh.
Fifth, the supporting cast. Both of these movies boast celebrated supporting casts intended to prop up their faded leads, though as is so often the case with jam-packed blockbusters, many of the most talented actors end up with precious little to do. Wonder Woman certainly did great work with Chris Pine, Robin Wright and Lucy Davis, though as members of Diana and Steve Trevor's team, the brilliant Saeed Tagmaoui and Ewan Bremner felt a tad underdeveloped. Also, the three villains stunk, albeit all played by wonderful actors, and there wasn't enough from Robin Wright or Connie Nielsen. On the other hand, Captain Marvel had crackerjack roles for Samuel L. Jackson, Ben Mendelsohn and Jude Law while making effective use of up-and-comer Lashana Lynch as Maria Rambeau. But like Wonder Woman, it struggled to find room for its other ensemble talents, namely Annette Bening, Jimin Hounsou, Lee Pace, Clark Gregg and Gemma Chan. This is a tough one to call, but between Jackson's singularly brilliant performance as a younger Nick Fury and Mendelsohn's great work as Talos, Captain Marvel just about edges it. Again, there's not much in it and both movies could have served their esteemed casts much better, but Jackson's brilliant chemistry with Brie Larson really made their scenes sing.
Sixth, the dialogue. There aren't too many superhero movies with truly great and evocative dialogue, because when the focus is primarily on the whiz-bang spectacle, audiences are generally fine putting up with lazy exposition and generic banter. Wonder Woman actually doesn't fare too badly though. There aren't too many lines which feel overtly creaky or familiar, and thanks to the strong central performances, there's a very genuine, earnest warmth to a lot of the chit-chat. Captain Marvel is conversely a far more sarcastic movie, true to the franchise's form, and arguably overdoes it a bit with the quipping, especially for Carol. It suffers a tad from Age of Ultron syndrome in overriding scenes with witty dialogue rather than allowing moments to breathe and humor to be borne out organically. There are some good laughs, but also a peculiar lack of memorable lines and some incredibly on-the-nose exposition, especially during the rough first act. Nothing in Captain Marvel can hold a candle to the relaxed brilliance of Wonder Woman's boat scene, to say nothing of the rest. An easy win for Wonder Woman.
Seventh, the visuals. A $150 million budget is never a guarantee for a great movie, but in this day and age it should guarantee a pretty handsome looking one. Wonder Woman is for the most part a pretty sharp film aesthetically. Yes, there's too much slow motion as mentioned in the third act, overdoses on blurry, goopy CGI nonsense, but the action is fluid and coherent for the most part and the film as a whole really pops. Captain Marvel is undeniably harangued by its filmmakers' inexperience in the genre, with irritatingly edited action sequences rendering much of the combat incomprehensible. The film as a whole also has a fairly flat, generic look to it, making it fail to stand out from most other MCU movies. The visual effects are also a bit of a mixed bag, especially in Act 3, but the digital de-aging CGI applied to Samuel L. Jackson is nothing short of movie magic. Wonder Woman seems like it had so much more thought put into its visuals and the end result is far more coherent. Captain Marvel conversely feels rather workman-like outside of a few choice moments, which is a damn shame. Less slow-mo on Wonder Woman 1984 though. please.
Eight. The music. And what's all that CGI-fueled action without some evocative music accompanying it? Wonder Woman was scored by Rupert Gregson-Williams, who also went on to score Aquaman. As a score it's fine, but most of the original compositions are fairly forgettable, even the epic ones, and the legendary Wonder Woman motif is obviously just recalled from Hans Zimmer's score for Batman vs Superman, so he gets no points there. Captain Marvel enlisted the efforts of composer Pinata Prak, who somewhat ironically provided additional music for Justice League. While so many of the MCU scores just feel generic and careless, the electronic stylings here recall the otherworldly strangeness of Thor Ragnarok's brilliant score from Mark Mothersbaugh. Captain Marvel may lack a memorable leitmotif or a distinctive theme for its hero, but moment to moment it's exciting and intense, while Wonder Woman's score is pretty much just a non-event.
Ninth, The Test of Time. Given that both movies are extremely recent, it's impossible to know exactly how they'll hold up in years and decades to come, but we can take a pretty decent stab at guessing. Wonder Woman's biggest issue aging-wise will definitely be its gaudy slow-motion effects. The portrayal of Wonder Woman itself is rock solid, and the subversion of the usual male-female superhero movie dynamic won't feel old anytime soon. Captain Marvel, however, is a fairly unremarkable-looking movie on day one, and it's likely to look more quaint and old-fashioned faster than Wonder Woman. It already feels like a glorified Phase 1 movie, so don't be surprised if it seems rather retrograde another decade from now. Wonder Woman captured a zeitgeist but also has the power to endure for a long time. Captain Marvel wanted to nail the same feeling but just didn't quite manage it. The former has images that stick in the mind and won't grow old anytime soon, but can the same really be said of Captain Marvel? An easy win for Team Diana.
The standalone appeal. It's absolutely not a requirement that these movies are digestible as entirely standalone films, but movie studios aren't stupid, and where possible they want to make these tentpoles as accessible to as wide an audience as possible. Both films are unmistakably tethered to franchises, but which one pulls off the juggling act better? Wonder Woman's slightly off-frame story nods quite obviously to the wider DCU, though the bulk of the story is incredibly on the level, and thanks to the period setting, it's almost entirely isolated away from the other Justice League members. Conversely, Captain Marvel is more intimately intertwined with the MCU as we know it, what with the inclusion of Nick Fury, Agent Coulson, Korath, and Ronan. But rather sensibly, a newbie could watch Captain Marvel without knowing these characters prior and still get the gist. It does provide a lead-in of sorts to Avengers Endgame, but it absolutely doesn't interfere with the bulk of the movie. Both films do a pretty solid job of batting away the demands of an intertwined movie universe, so this is a tough one to call. Aside from the frame story, Wonder Woman feels more unrestrained by its franchise, while Captain Marvel does have to make a few concessions for bigger picture stuff. Wonder Woman by a nose, but neither does much wrong here.
Eleventh, as a female-led superhero movie. There's no denying that the key distinguishing characteristic of both of these movies is that they're the first female-led superhero films in their respective franchises. They've both received flack from repellent sexists as a result, and they're both important entries into pop culture for young girls seeking statuesque role models. Wonder Woman is a more explicitly gendered film than Captain Marvel for sure. Her gender is in the title for one, but it also does a wonderful job of inverting typical gender dynamics, particularly in relation to Diana and Steve's relationship. Furthermore, people were literally weeping over the iconic No Man's Land sequence, which says all that needs to be said about how this film connected with women in particular. Unfortunately, it's tough to think of a single scene in Captain Marvel that rouses quite the same emotion. The rising up montage in the third act is pretty great, but otherwise the film's attempts to toot the girl power horn come off a bit embarrassing, namely the ill-paced use of No Doubt's hit tune Just a Girl. As the 21st entry into the MCU and the series' first female superhero film, Captain Marvel should have been a home run, but it lacks Wonder Woman's fist-pumping verve and comes off a bit flat in places. Wonder Woman, conversely, totally rocked its girl power without needing to pander aggressively to its audience.
Okay, now the conclusion. It's now time to check the scores at the doors and see who came out on top. In our 11 categories, Captain Marvel scored a mere 3 wins, while Wonder Woman scooped an impressive 8, making it a pretty decisive landslide win for Diana Prince. Captain Marvel isn't a bad movie by any means, but it's outclassed in almost every category by Wonder Woman. It's that simple. Both movies have their share of flaws and could be improved by leaner direction and more nuanced writing, but Wonder Woman is sure to endure as a highly entertaining superhero film and a watershed moment for progressive cinema. Captain Marvel will be held up as accomplishing a similar milestone, but given the MCU's red-hot track record and the sheer promise of the project, aren't we all wishing the end result was a whole lot better? What movie did you prefer? Agree or disagree with our picks? Shout it out in the comments.